social section of Business Beyond Tomorrow. This is the panel. It'll be about an hour long. We have some brief introductions to do, then about 45 minutes of panel questions, and then a 10-minute Q&A period. So you'll be able to ask questions. You can either do that with your camera or by sending your questions to Anfar, who I'll actually spotlight myself too. Yeah, so in the last 10 minutes, we'll be looking at all the questions that you sent us, and hopefully we can get through them all. And then I think that's it. So I'll pass it on to Duha, who will be the moderator for this event.
Thank you, Olivia. Hi, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to the panel today. And I would introduce myself very briefly, and then I would pass it on to our panelists to introduce themselves. So introducing myself, my name is Duha. I am the Education and Engagement Coordinator at Sustainable Concordia. And I'm also a graduate student at Concordia's Community Economic Development Program at the SCPA. And I have a background in nonprofit management, academically, and also by practice. And I've been involved in the community sector and community organizing for the past 10 years in different parts of the world. And yeah, I'm very happy to be here today. And so I would pass it on with Deeksha. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you, Duha. Hello, everyone. My name is Deeksha. I'm originally from India. I moved to Montreal 3 years ago, enjoying so far. I have around 5 years of experience in startups, nonprofit, research, and as a consultant. Currently, I'm working as a freelance sustainability consultant, and looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you, Deeksha. Dyana, you can go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Before I introduce myself, I'd like to say that I'm currently based out of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And so just for some land acknowledgement, I'm based out of Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis. It's important for me to say that. My name is Dyana. My pronouns are she and her. I'm currently a graduate student of psychology at the University of Saskatchewan. And I am a co-creator, co-administrator of BIPOC Coffee Talk, which is a virtual discussion group here in Saskatoon. We meet monthly to discuss lived experiences of being BIPOC and other related issues.
Thank you, Dyana. And thanks also for letting us know which territory and which nation that you're in. And I would like to pass it on to Chantal to introduce herself as well.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chantal, and I am based a lot out of Concordia in the past. So I did my MBA there, as well as a Master's of Environment. And when I was doing the MBA, I was the first part of the first team of what has become JSEC. So it used to be called the John Wilson Sustainable Business Group, and now it's JSEC. So it's really exciting to be here at the conference because I helped host one of the first of these conferences. That's kind of cool. I was a sustainability coordinator for Concordia for a number of years until 2 years ago when I started up my own sustainability consultant business.
Amazing, thank you, Chantal. So we do have our panelists are coming from different parts of sustainability, which is, definitely will bring richness to the conversation today. And I would like to actually start us off by grounding ourselves with what we mean by social sustainability, and especially in the context of today's conversation. Obviously, there isn't one, big definition that we can say like this is what social sustainability is. And it is also usually the least aspect of sustainability that is talked about and brought in larger conversations. But in a general sense, and for the sake of this conversation today, what we're talking about is the impact of businesses in society in general, and more specifically, their relationship with their community, their relationship with their employees. So we'll be looking at the roles of businesses in this, roles of businesses in ensuring diversity and inclusion, and also in prioritizing the well-being of their employees. So with that, I will start with the first question that I have for our panelists today, which is, what is the role of businesses in acknowledging social sustainability issues? I don't know if Deeksha, you would like to start again?
Sure, no problem. I would say that business wouldn't exist without a social structure in place. So it's not an option for business to look at social sustainability, but it's a mandatory thing. So if the business does not take care of the social structure, it would be not taking care of their own business. So it isn't something that is external to business, but it's very, very intrinsic, and it is what in part makes the business run successfully or even smoothly, to say.
Thank you, Deeksha. Chantal, would you like to add to that?
I think Deeksha summed it up really well. The only other thing I would add is that the social sustainability of a business doesn't just include its own business. I think it also includes their whole value chain. So from customers to suppliers, if you have really good social sustainability at your institution or business, it will go along the line.
Thank you, Chantal. And Dyana, would you like to add something to that as well?
Not much. Those are really great responses. I think the role of business in acknowledging social sustainability issues is pretty much the role of any other enterprise, to institute policies and take actions that promote social sustainability issues. And often they do have the power to institute policies. That's very important for me to say, but not much more than that.
Thank you so much, all of you. And I would like to bring this actually to something that is often the topic of conversations, and I think still not enough. There are still not enough conversations around this, and there's still not enough meaningful work that's happening within corporations and businesses when it comes to this, which is diversity and inclusion. And so I would like to ask you, how can we spark conversations about diversity and inclusion that really go beyond the surface level talk about it, and something that initiates truly meaningful, not just on a personal level, but systemic and institutional change within businesses and corporations? So maybe we can go the other way around. Dyana, would you like to start first?
Yeah, I'd love to. This was a really interesting question, I think, because to address systemic change, there has to be change at the level of the individual, because individuals make up those systems. And for me, I think my answer would be that it's important to foster a sense of accountability for each and every individual. You may or may not know about the bystander effect. So we know from psychological studies that individuals, when gathered in a group, when they see someone being harmed or hurt, they're less likely to do something about it because they expect that someone else is going to step in. And we can apply the same principle to issues of diversity in the workplace or whatever other context. If we keep passing up opportunities to speak up and we're not held accountable at the individual level, then nobody's going to get helped in the long term. So this mentality of shifting responsibility to someone else is toxic. We can spend our whole lives shifting the responsibility to others, but the effects are very costly. And I'd like to quickly paint a picture of how costly it can be. For example, I guess I'm going to use racism as an example because that's something that I can speak a little bit of from my own experience and just my own knowledge. But of course, there are other issues that affect diverse populations. We know that racism is linked to anxiety and depression and PTSD. Look at it from a public health perspective. We know how long it takes to see a general health practitioner or specialist here in Canada, right? And did you know that a substantial number of those visits are mental health related? General practitioners are the main source of mental health care for most Canadians. Now imagine how much more accessible our doctors would be if mental health visits related to racism and depression were drastically cut down, because we all took a slice of the pie and stepped in to speak up when no one else is doing it. And not only that, but think of how many people go on disability leave because of mental health reasons related to racial discrimination. Where does that money come from? That's taxpayer money. That's us. That affects everyone. So to people with excuses about how, they can't possibly relate to the experience of another because of racism, it affects everyone. mental health costs affect the economy. And I found one article from 2018. I couldn't find the Canadian equivalent, but it's work that needs to be done. And it was looking at the impacts of experiences with racial discrimination and the health outcomes that result from that, and then the overall cost to the economy. The study took place in Australia, and they found that the costs to the economy, because of these experiences of racism that then influence health, costed them 37.9 billion per year. So I think sharing these kinds of anecdotes, these kinds of points for people is one way to increase everyone's accountability, because unfortunately not a lot of people can relate to the emotional component of how devastating racism can be. Well, let's change the narrative and frame it in a perspective where everyone suddenly feels accountable. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for bringing up accountability. This is really an absolutely crucial part of ensuring that, that we do have inclusion in workplaces. And I would like to maybe hear from Deeksha on this as well.
Yeah, so Diana brought up very good points, and to add on to that, like she said, it's each person's responsibility. So the social structure, the business structure, it does not operate in isolation. So everything is interconnected. So it's not really the who does what and for whose benefit. It's everyone contributes for everyone's benefit, and it has to start some way. So if it's not the business, if it's not the government, it has to be the people, the employees, the society, the civil society, the larger public. So it starts somewhere, and unfortunately in the times that we are in, it takes maybe a huge accident or a big incident for people to wake up and realize, hey, there's an issue and we need to do something about it. And suddenly you see businesses putting up their policies, or like saying, hey, we support Black Lives Movement, Black Lives Matter, and we support this cause or that cause. But that's it's okay that that they are able to say that, but it shouldn't take human lives or something as big as that to make them do that.
Absolutely. I think that is such an important point, that this is something that needs to be, like, businesses need to be proactive about this and not reactive, waiting for something to happen until some action is taken. Absolutely. And Chantal, I don't know if you wanted to add something as well on this.
It's actually really interesting because I focused on a tool that's available to help. So actually this is a perfect culmination. It's like as if we planned it or something. So I found that a really useful tool comes from the Center for Global Inclusion. It's called the Global Diversity and Inclusion Benchmarks. And it is an amazing tool for an organization specifically to use to come up with what the best practices are in the field of diversity and inclusion. And I found that they have best practices, and then they have kind of down the spectrum, there's 5 different levels. So you can really see where your organization is and create a gap analysis and really be able to focus on what your next step can be, where you can move up. And it's a really resourceful, concrete tool. Because for some people, I feel some of the concepts might be a little bit confusing about where to start. And this benchmark really lays it out.
Thank you, Chantal. Maybe later on, maybe at the Q&A session or something, if you're able to maybe drop a link or something so that people can go further and check that. I know I personally would love to check it out. Thank you for bringing that up. But also speaking about this, like Diana, you talked about how like it's not like it's the responsibility of everybody to speak up about this instance of racism, for example, at a workplace or discrimination in all its forms. But oftentimes, and I know I can speak from personal experience on this as well in workplaces, there are barriers to having these conversations, especially when you're at the lower end of the hierarchy. When we talk about, usually corporations and businesses love hierarchies and they always have hierarchies. So when you're at the lower end of this, it's not as comfortable, or it can get really ugly for you to talk about these things. And again, like talking about how that can bring PTSD and anxiety and and all these things. So thinking about that, how can we address those barriers that exist that make people feel unsafe to bring up conversations like this? And even, you know, touching on accountability, Diana, which you talked about as well, like before we reach accountability, how can we even bring this up? How can we even talk about this? And what kind of mechanisms would we have in place to ensure that there is safety and protection when people address issues of racism?
Would you like me to start?
I would love that, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Okay. My answer might not be the most popular one, and I know that there are better answers than this one because I guess I'm trying to frame it from the perspective of the individual. For those of us, at least, that have experienced racism, it's a very disempowering experience. You know, we're already starting on the lower end of that ladder because of the experiences that we've had that make us feel like we don't have power. And so I guess my answer is more tailored to experiences where we feel we don't have power, but we also, how can I frame this? I guess my answer is going to speak more to those situations where we are on the lower end of this power dynamic, but where people are open to hearing us. I guess that's what I'm trying to say that I'm going to focus on. Because these experiences have been so disempowered, a lot of the times, the struggle and the journey is about finding our power back, and self-empowerment, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. A lot of the times when there's a power dynamic, we feel uncomfortable, understandably so, feel uncomfortable. But because of that, we're not always, or it's possible that sometimes we're not aware of the resources that are available to us, or we're not aware of our rights, for example. And it's safer to not speak up. And I understand that. And so tackling this from the perspective of like as an individual, I think the way to tackle that would be to become knowledgeable, like know your rights at your workplace and legally. And usually the law is on our side, you know, in instances of racial discrimination. I know that it's helpful, for example, to join discussion groups to learn from others who have been in similar positions to empower each other. Attend workshops and seminars to see, well, maybe how is the best way to approach this? What are some steps that I can take to move up this uncomfortable ladder of seeking help? You know, who would be the most approachable person that I can turn to? Where in my workplace, like who are potential allies that can support me in this if I open up to them? And the other one that's coming to mind is probably not the most popular one because it's just so inaccessible to many people, but therapy. Therapy is a process of self-empowerment. And for those of us that have access to it from work benefits or as student benefits, I would encourage everyone to use it. A lot of these things means for self-empowerment are things that I've used, and all of them have helped me to manage the uncomfortable power dynamic that exists between a BIPOC employee and a white employer. And it has helped. Obviously, that my answer doesn't apply to situations in which the whole system is really against that individual, and even friendliness or support or even things like that aren't in place. And I know that, and I'd be curious to hear from other panelists about how they would tackle some of those strategies or some of those situations, sorry.
Sure, I would like to jump in there. So first thing I would say is not to give up. I mean, irrespective of the hierarchy that you are in, when you have a thought and you want to do something about it, so don't give up unless you have reached that stage where you are personally satisfied with what you wanted to accomplish. So that's the first point I would say. And if you're not being heard, don't raise your voice. It's not that you would want to have a loudspeaker and talk louder about it. Maybe try whispering, you know. So it's the way that you find the channels and the space to make this heard more. So maybe not talk louder, but maybe talk to more people. You know, so that can kind of bring a trickling movement. And when it actually becomes big or heard about above in the hierarchy, it might not be just you alone. It might be a group of people. So that gives you voice, that gives you support. So these are a few points that I can suggest. And it's not always possible to make the management or make the businesses hear about it. They might not even take any action, but they need to be aware that people are willing to ask you the question. So you are not alone, like the businesses are not unaccountable. There are people that they have to be accountable to. And if not today, tomorrow, this will be a huge task or huge issue that you have to answer to or address to. So it at least gives them the thought that they cannot push this forever. They need to address it at some point in time.
One quick thing I would like to add, because I love both of your points. I think that's a great way of doing it. And being kind of a more junior level in a company can feel really intimidating and threatening, but there are lunchrooms, there's space to have events, even informal events, and bringing up these topics at those places, as well as through informal smaller events and things like that. You're not the only one that's going through something at work. And so I think these issues can be brought up in those ways, and I think that that's accessible for a junior member. I think reaching out across departments as well, you'll find champions in different areas, and as more and more champions start caring about this and wanting to do things and get encouraged by doing things as a group, that's when momentum builds and strength as well.
Thank you so much for all your inputs. And I think if I can add one thing also as well, just from my community organizing perspective, where it happens a lot that we get in touch with people who have experienced certain negative things in their workplaces and are looking for sources outside of their company, community organizations that are working on these issues that can help ensure your safety while you're addressing those issues, but also ensure that there is some sort of engagement, at least on a customer level, if it needs to get to that, because that's usually where it can hit really hard for businesses, when their customers get to know that there is a lack of action happening somewhere. And with that, I would also actually like to touch on something that's very important right now in the time of COVID, which is social isolation, as most people are working online. And things like that. So if any of you can share from your experiences in your workspaces, if there's been some successful strategies in place to help employees connect more with one another and feel sort of a sense of belonging while navigating this digital space. Chantal, would you like to start with that?
Yeah, sure. I think there's several things that have come out of the pandemic. Some of them are positive and some of them not so much, right? A lot of people have been losing their jobs, and a lot of those jobs are kind of more lower income jobs. And it's really, it's just a tough situation on top of an already tough situation. And one of the positive things that I think has come out, though, is working from home has really humanized people. I don't know if people remember what it was like before the pandemic, when if a child or a pet ran across your office when you're on a video conference, it was the biggest deal, and now it's just part of reality. My partner works from home as well, and several times I'll hear all sorts of noises coming on from his conference calls, and I think that that's important to humanize people and to make people see that, yes, we all have hierarchies, but there is a certain level. Everybody, a lot of people have pets, a lot of people have family, children, things like that. And so I think that is one nice aspect that has come out of the pandemic, and one positive one at least.
Yeah, I completely agree with Chantal. And in a way, pandemic has made us more human, to accept things as we are. And Of course, it's not easy because we are doing everything in the same space. Like, this is my office, this is my home, this is my playground, this is my party place, you know, everything's happening in the same physical space, and it's not easy. And also it's not easy for everyone because our situation is different. For someone, for a single person working from home, and the situation may be easy in a way that, you know, might be easy to work, but with people, with children, with families, it might be difficult to manage different things. So each of us are going through or experiencing different aspects, both I would say less positive, but not negative, but challenging in a way. Like it kind of like throws upon us to say, are you really a multitasking person? You know, can you be working at the same time? Can you be managing your kids? Can you also be doing things at home? So it's not the same for everyone. And as colleagues, we tend to know these things about each other. So this has given us a time to really understand who are the people that we are working with, what is it that they are going through, apart from maybe not being able to meet a deadline, not being able to finish a presentation, or, you know, not submitting a file, etc. So we are trying to see who are these people we are working with beyond the office space, who they are. And you know, we do miss the coffee conversation, we do miss the lunch breaks, you know, the gossips, etc. But it's okay. I mean, we've tried to, you know, move beyond that and invent a little things of our own. Maybe one example I can give is like playing online together. You know, so it's not like a serious game or so, it's like a Pictionary or, you know, something like that. You start playing online and you have fun. And most of the times I observe that even if we take we are in a call, as it's a coffee call or something like that, most often we start to talk about work than about something else, and it's difficult. So I would suggest do an activity together, or talk about a hobby, or, you know, explain, you have a workshop, like, you know, you teach something that you know, or even play damsharat or something like that. So make it not about work, you know. So just for those few minutes, the person has to like at least enjoy the social interaction of not doing work, but enjoying with each other.
Diana, would you like to add to that as well?
Sure. Deeksha kind of touched on this point already. I guess I'll just expand on it further, that essentially the pandemic and working from home and the loneliness has mobilized some of us to reach out and do, I guess, what we otherwise wouldn't be doing to get our needs met as social beings. So for example, at my workplace, unfortunately, not much has been done in the way of fostering connections between all of us, and they've kind of left it on us. But I guess from that situation, I guess I'm talking about myself, is because there was a need for me to be more connected, especially with people from my community, and how lonely it is to live alone and work alone. I guess that's what, for me, spawned the creation of the club that I'm a part of. So it was through that need of wanting social connection that me and a friend thought, why don't we do something virtual, and then that way meet others in the safest way possible. And so, you know, it's unfortunate that it had to come from a place of being lonely and being in need of social support and curiosity about learning about other cultures. But I guess I'm thankful that it did happen in the end, and that the barriers that were in place, mostly fear, were kind of, I guess, not as important as the need to connect with others.
Thank you so much, all of you, for touching on that. And I also just would like to bring this back again to COVID and how obviously the pandemic has really exacerbated a lot of inequalities that have already been existing, but the situation has sort of amplified a lot of these inequalities. And, you know, we talked about working from home, and obviously the challenges of working from home while doing care work and care labor, but also thinking about people who don't get to work from home, you know, people who work in essential businesses, essential services that require them to be working, and sometimes even working in conditions where they're not, you know, they're not having enough protection from COVID or enough PPE and things like that. So just thinking about that, if you, you know, want to share some of the things that you know on what's happening when it comes to inequalities and how the pandemic has affected this, and even on a business level, like how have businesses been addressing these situations when it comes to inequalities?
Do you mind if I go first? One thing that I have noticed, and again, it's a positive aspect, and I hope it remains, is that, you know, it's really highlighted the predominantly female roles that have been qualified as essential and crucial to our survival. Things from obviously nurses, senior home caretakers, and then things like social workers, teachers. We can't get through this without them, and it's so nice to hear finally them referred to as essential workers. And I really hope that that kind of prestige stays on and starts a ripple effect of really rewarding and you know, giving them what they need to do their work and take them seriously and give them proper pay. It's ridiculous that, you know, some of these jobs are some of the lower paid jobs in our society, yet they are crucial. And so I really hope that this pandemic has shone light on that. That's kind of one of the main points that I wanted to mention on this.
Thank you. Deeksha, would you like to go?
Sure. Businesses have realized that their existence can be threatened, and pandemic is one of the examples, which is more urgent than climate change. So every business was preparing to address climate change as the, you know, emergency that came into existence. But today they have an immediate emergency than climate change, which is caused by the pandemic, and that has given them the sneak peek into what even climate change can do. So it's like some businesses didn't really want to kind of acknowledge or say that you know, climate change is a hoax or whatever, but this kind of gives them a picture of what really can happen to a business. And it's something that is not really in terms of your revenue, in terms of your market share. No, it's in terms of your basic business viability. You know, it's like, is your product or is your business still relevant in the market? You know, so these are some of the basic questions that businesses have to answer today, and that's out of the pandemic. You know, it's like, am I still you know, valid, like in the post pandemic? Like, will I still be there? So it's not just about the small businesses that have been really hurt because of the situation, but it's even more the bigger ones that will come to, you know, answer these questions as we move on.
Thank you, Deeksha. Diana, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Those are really great responses. The only thing that occurred to me wasn't so much at the level of the adults currently employed by businesses. I'm taking more of a different perspective, because I'm thinking of the children that have been affected by the pandemic, because they are the adults of tomorrow and they will enter the workforce in a few years. And the one thing that occurred to me was just on a little review I did recently. because we know that several schools, for example, have been doing their teaching remotely. But we also know that access to the internet and technologies that provide the internet is not equal to everyone. And a few news articles have predicted that the achievement and socioeconomic gap that exists between the predominant culture and visible minority cultures is only going to get even bigger because of having to study from home, where access to the internet may already be limited, slow, or non-existent. So for example, I'm tying it back to race again. For example, we know that Black children are more likely than white children to not have appropriate internet access during this pandemic. And so as a result, we know that all children are behind. You know, schools were, had to adapt really quickly when this took place over the spring and summer of last year. But Black children, for example, are drastically behind by their schooling by about, I think it was reported 5 to 12 months, which is much more than their white counterparts. And so depending on the actions that the school boards choose to take to catch everyone up, it could have very, you know, big consequences, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And these are children that will enter the workforce in a few years. Children and teens of color may enter it with limited knowledge, especially compared to their white counterparts, which is only going to, I think, perpetuate the racist idea that they're inferior in some way, when really it would have been the school system that has failed them. Now, obviously this is a possibility, and I'm only discussing this as a possibility because school systems tend to rely on remediation. We don't know what's going to happen to catch everyone up, and we know that remediation has big disadvantages, but it's not factual. I don't know it to be fact, and I'm only discussing this possibility based on historical evidence of systems failing visible minorities. And so based on what I'm talking about today, and the stats for all this is on my club page if anyone is really interested in seeing that, diversity isn't being considered as a factor to well-being and education, which is problematic. And what I really wanted to say, which is the point I've been trying to get at, is that we don't get to sweep COVID-19 under the rug when it's all over, you know? The effects will linger for a while. And so this is all something to consider to everyone in managerial, educational, any positions of power who will eventually employ, teach, or care for this future generation that is being impacted. So I guess considering the extenuating circumstances that places BIPOC folks in more disadvantaged positions is my takeaway.
Thank you, Diana. That's a really, really wonderful point, and thank you so much for sharing that. So I think I would like to kind of, because we do have a Q&A session coming up shortly, so kind of to bring that back to, again, like to diversity and inclusion, and I would like to maybe hear what it means to you personally, and also, do you think that because of all the other things that are happening around the pandemic, do you think that the conversation around this is being pushed aside or sort of left behind, or do you think otherwise, like because of the things that have happened in the summer, a lot of action around Black Lives Matter in the summer, do you think that that also, like what had happened in the conversations in the summer, do you think that this will actually be leading to continuous conversations and won't kind of push that aside in a few months? I don't know who would like to start. Deeksha, would you like to start?
Sure. I think it's not going to stop. It's just the beginning, because once it comes to the foreground, you know, it's you can't push it aside. So it's only going to gain momentum. So it's out there. It's out there. Everyone's talking in different intensity, different grade, different, you know, it's not just the businesses, it's in the society, it's not just the workforce, it's there are students discussing this, there are different sections of community discussing this. So it is not in the space of workplace anymore. So it's in the bigger space of society and community. And I think it's just the beginning, and this is going to lead to many more conversations in many different ways. And it is also going to lead the foundation for different things, possibly like when you consider social sustainability, like we could consider, you know, equality of pay, or we could consider about talent attraction and retention, or we could talk about even health and safety, and, you know, a lot of other things. So diversity and inclusion just happen to, you know, be the spotlight for the reasons that happen. And this is going to lead to many more discussions to come. That's my personal take.
Thank you, Deeksha. Dyana, would you like to go?
I agree with Deeksha, definitely. I'm not sure there's much more I can add other than to say that I worry. You know, I do worry that momentum usually tends to be strong at the beginning, and then over time, the causes lose support. We saw that after, like shortly after George Floyd's death, where there was this huge momentum for supporting Black Lives Matter, and there is I'm going based on knowledge that I remember reading from news articles, was that BLM actually lost support after a few months later, I think by the fall of next year. These things happen, and I don't know why. I go back to this piece on accountability, that if we all continued to have or fostered a sense of accountability, even for issues that we think on the surface don't affect us, if we did that and not only, you know, generated a sense of accountability for everyone, but sustained that accountability and held on to it longer, then I would have a little bit more or less worry, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But I do worry that diversity is being pushed aside sometimes, or that at least, even if it's not right now, that it will be, based on what we've seen in the past for important movements.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Dyana, Chantal, would you like to add something on that as well?
Not very much. They both covered it so well. Just to say that I'm really glad that these issues were brought in the foreground. You can say it's one of the positive aspects of COVID, because without it, many of these things would not have come to light. And it's true, it might start fading when things start, let's say, going back to normal. But it was out there. It's affecting a lot of people on all the different issues of social sustainability. And so as long as people who are working in these organizations, who are in their communities, and they're remembering how important this is to them, and they're willing to keep the discussion going, I think that that's going to help a lot.
Maybe just to add a point on that, from the current pandemic, it gave like time for people to pause and kind of do their homework, because there wasn't much to do outside. There wasn't business happening. There weren't projects going up. So it gave time for everyone to consolidate and to think, okay, what is it that we did? What is it that we are doing? What is it that we have to do? And when it comes to business, or in terms of even social sustainability, it's not the relationship is not a one-on-one. Like, it's not just business being accountable to the society, or the society being accountable or being asked or answering or questioning the business. It's also the other stakeholders that are involved in this whole scenario. For example, investors. So investors are big time asking questions to companies, because it's their money that's on stake. So it's like, yes, maybe the talking might be less, the movement might reduce, but there are some important actors that have caught the attention, and that in all my good hope and wish, they continue to ask these questions, and not just ask in terms of a conversation, but more in terms of accountability, in a way of their financial accountability. There's also sustainability reporting, and they are accountable to say what they are doing about these things. So I believe that it's not just about talking. So it's more about showing on paper, in written, about what they are doing and what they will be doing in the future.
Absolutely. Amazing point, Deeksha. And I totally hear you as well, Dyana, with like the point of worrying, right? Like it's true that a lot of movements have momentum when things are heated up and happening, and everybody's going around, as Deeksha mentioned earlier, you know, posting out statements and all these things, and that's great. But, you know, what happens after that? Are these statements being followed through? Are these statements really being kind of put into the values of businesses and corporations and really applied? And, you know, do we just forget about this and move on, or do we continue? Like it is, as Dyana mentioned, it is everybody's responsibilities on all levels to continue these conversations and to really continue taking on more policies that you know, protect people in instances of abuse and discrimination. So with that, we would I would love to thank all the panelists today for their very rich and valuable conversations and talks. I really enjoyed it, and I really I believe that our audiences as well have enjoyed it. And so we would at this point open it up for questions and answers from the audience. And I think I would pass that to Anne Fleur, is it?
Yes, so thank you so much everyone for your answers. It was super interesting. We have a few questions from the audience, so we probably won't get to all of them, but we'll try to get through as many as we can in 10 minutes. So I will start with, what are some ways to measure the social impact of a company? And anyone can start.
That's a very good question, especially because social sustainability is evolving. And I find that every few years, there's different categories and different ways of looking at it. It can range from things like how many donations or community engagement a company does, which is kind of the old school version of social sustainability, all the way to looking at different reporting mechanisms that there are out there right now. Again, they are updated quite often, and so that might be one way of doing it. But there isn't necessarily a concrete way of measuring social sustainability, similar to, I feel, you know, financial stuff we got down. Environment stuff is getting really strong now, and the social stuff it needs to catch up. I put the link up for the diversity and inclusion benchmarks. That to me is such a quality way of looking at organizations. And I think that's what's going to end up happening. A few little things are going to be popping up. There's a few governance things coming out too, especially when you consider the environmental, social, and governance parts of what financial investment sector is looking into now. But that's a big question.
Maybe to add on to Chantal, she mentioned about different reporting frameworks and guidelines that help us look into what are the parameters or what are the indicators that we can help to measure our social impact. First thing for any organization would be to really understand what is the interaction it is having with the social structure. So if you say that the main social structure is the human capital, and then you look at, okay, what is happening with this human capital? For example, employees. So you have employees coming in, you have them working, and they go back. So what do you pay? What kind of people you have? Do you have representation, like in diversity, for example, gender diversity? Do you have equal number of men and women working in your organization? Can you maintain this share at every level of the hierarchy? You know, how many women are there in board of directors? What is the amount of revenue that you're spending on employee training and development? You know, so it really depends on what the company or the organization is trying to achieve by measuring these impacts. In terms of there could be an organization that is providing product or service that has a social impact. Then you would look at these impacts in a different way. So it really depends on the context that you are looking at the social impacts. And for sure, the reporting guidelines like the GRI, the SASB, etc. You have a few examples you could start with.
One other quick thing I'll just add, Dyana, in case you wanted to jump in. One thing to look out for, though, if you're just looking as kind of a citizen and looking for general information about companies, is to go and look into their policies and plans. If they're not mentioning social sustainability or any socially related issues in those places, then you know that it's probably not very much a priority in their organization.
Perfect. Thank you so much for answering that. Our next question will be, if racial inequality related opportunity of outcomes is supposed to get worse through the effects of COVID, what should be done to mitigate or prevent this effect, and what can we do?
Would you mind just repeating that question, please? That first part, I just want clarified.
Yeah. If racial inequality related opportunity of outcomes is supposed to get worse through the effects of COVID, what should be done to mitigate or prevent this effect, and what can we do?
It's sort of trying to answer the hypothetical question, because we really don't know how things are going to be played out, and just the realization of inequalities and indifferent opportunities, you know, I would say that everyone is trying to address this to ensure that post-pandemic things change, and it helps in addressing these inequalities. For example, it's about putting things in place to address the current need. For example, during the pandemic, a lot of students didn't have internships, or they couldn't find internships. But there were university programs, university coordinators coming up with a solution, like trying to find companies, you know, and trying to get fund from different way, and ensure that students are not you know, they have something to work with, and also that they are paid for. And this inequality was the way the inequality is coming out of this is because of different funding opportunities. So there were funding opportunities for certain section of the student community, whereas there wasn't for another. But the people, the university, they stepped up to ensure that everyone is taken care of. So this is just an example that I can give, that of course, first step would be to acknowledging that there would be these indifferences, and then accepting that, moving forward, I'm sure there would be a lot of support from the community to ensure that this is addressed.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. So we'll have two more questions. So how can we support businesses working on or supporting diversity and inclusion, or trust that what they are telling the public is what is actually going on internally?
I heard a really good podcast the other day. It was actually spotlighting Starbucks. And so I was curious to hear more about this podcast, and I started listening to it. But they have come up with a pretty comprehensive sounding system of kind of town hall meetings and things like that, to really figure out how to develop, job design, classification, compensation, development, advancement with different, diversity and inclusion measures in place. And so I think that looking for those things that don't just touch the surface, but really touch deeper down will definitely be an indicator right there.
Does anyone else want to speak, or can I go to the next question?
Maybe if you go look at this organization's team, or like the highest leadership team, and you see the diversity there, then it's probably going to trickle down. So that could be one of the easiest way to assess if they are doing what they are saying. Of course, it's going to take time, but at least if they've taken the first step to have someone in the highest leadership position, then there's a hope to ensure that it will disseminate.
Perfect, thank you so much. And then for our last question, how can we continue the momentum of the Black Lives Matter movement and other social movements within Concordia University?
To keep talking. Use any and every platform, every opportunity you get to bring up the words, bring up the conversation. Maybe people don't talk because they don't know. Especially in Montreal, in Concordia, it's the land of immigrants. Like, we all come from different places, from different cultures. Not everyone knows everything that's happening in this part of the world. So maybe people don't talk because they don't know in the first place. So by talking, you are making more people aware of these aspects and making them more, informing them. And this will lead to them supporting and possibly like taking action, being a part of this in a bigger sense.
I agree with that answer. I guess I'll just jump in. I do agree, but also I think it's important to specify who we're talking to. So not just on the social media posts, where it tends to be safer to, to support a movement or something like that, or, just the word performative allyship comes up, and that can be easily more done through social media. But we need to take responsibility for having these conversations and talking to even our loved ones. None of us are free of the biases, of the unconscious ones. Teaching our children, have conversations about, discrimination and marginalized communities and lack of opportunity with children. Have these conversations with as many people as possible in different contexts. I was recently a part of a discussion group a couple months back now where a similar topic kind of came up, and I remember I really appreciated the honesty of this one individual who said that he didn't feel comfortable talking about these issues specifically because he wasn't part of a marginalized community. And so in instances where, he hears something or sees something that he knows isn't right, but he doesn't feel it's his place. And gently, the group there kind of challenged that idea that it wasn't his place because in his case, I guess the deterring factor was white privilege and being white. But who better to have as an ally than folks that have historically oppressed marginalized communities, right? I mean, a lot of these conversations, the negative ones about marginalized communities that take place, sometimes they happen behind our backs, right? And they'll happen in the context of an echo chamber where there isn't going to be someone to challenge that. But if we can kind of infiltrate through people that don't necessarily share our pain from the lived experience, but can take on some of the weight of this burden, then this would be a much more, how can I say this? I don't want to be dreamy and say, well, then racism will be gone, because, you know, that's just not likely. You know, it's a lot of it comes back to unconscious biases. But the problem would be so much more manageable, at least on the shoulders of different specific individuals. It would be, again, I'm coming back to this piece on accountability and how much more lighter on our shoulders it would be if we each held up our own piece of it. Yeah, that's all I wanted to add.
Thank you so much. So, last point.
It was just specific to Concordia.
Okay, yeah.
So many groups, has so many different events going on. I feel as if just with what Dyana said about different contexts and getting people in different contexts, I think that Concordia is especially lucky to be able to have all those mediums. So just having different people participating in different ways. So you can have something that's a bit more informational, something that's a bit more action oriented, some things that offline, online, food events, everybody attends food events, just things like that. I think Concordia, you can definitely do great things at Concordia to keep movements alive. It does take a little bit of work to do, but there are resources out there at Concordia.
Thank you so much. So we'll end the questions there in the panel. We do have our social workshop coming up at 6:30, but thank you so much to our speakers for answering our questions and for everyone who attended and for giving us questions as well. I do want to just point out one last thing, that the registration for the Networking Cocktail and Company Fair ends tonight at midnight, so make sure to do that. And otherwise, we're all set. Thank you so much to everyone. This was super interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me and letting me be a part of this.
Of course, thank you so much.